I have a plan. It starts as a rallying cry, a promise, a compass pointing toward freedom, toward brotherhood, toward something bigger than survival. But by the end, it's a curse. A whisper echoing in an empty cave, spoken by a man no one believes anymore, including himself. So, what happened to Dutch Vanderlyn? How does a man go from being the soul of a gang, the philosopher outlaw, the visionary, the father, to a ghost with a gun, and no one left to follow him? Was it betrayal? Was it pride? Or was it something simpler and far more terrifying? Did Dutch start believing his own lies? That's the question this video is here to answer. Not through one scene, but through the slow unraveling of a man who mistook charisma for truth and a dream for direction. This isn't just a fall from grace. It's a man devouring his own myth in real time. Before the collapse, Dutch didn't speak like a man. He spoke more like a movement. He talked about freedom, about civilization being a sickness, about government as the great thief, about progress as a cage built on velvet and iron. To the world, he was a criminal, but to the gang, he was a reason. And that's the key to understanding how far Dutch will eventually fall. Because Dutch wasn't leading by force. He was leading with words, with belief, with this glowing, untouchable vision of a life that was always just over the next ridge. He wasn't chasing money, he was chasing meaning. That's why people followed him. Not just Arthur or Hosea, but everyone. The gang wasn't just a group, it was a philosophy, a family with a shared grievance, a surrogate for every broken home and forgotten soul who needed to believe that running meant something. And for a while, it worked. Dutch made them feel righteous. Not good, not lawful, just righteous. And that's what makes his unraveling so tragic. Because Dutch didn't start out lying. He actually believed. He believed the world was broken, that the people who wrote the laws were thieves in suits, that you could be an outlaw and still live with a little bit of honor. And for Arthur, for Hosea, for the rest of them, that belief mattered because it gave their violence shape. It gave their running purpose. But here's the thing about idealists. They don't bend well. And when the world starts pressing back, when the plans fail, when people die, when the cracks start forming, it's not just the plan that breaks, it's the man. Dutch's tragedy isn't that he changed, it's that he didn't know how to. Dutch never had all the answers. But in the early days, he listened to Hosea's doubts, to Arthur's instincts, to the world when it pushed back. His ego may have been loud, but there was room for other voices. And then suddenly, there wasn't. The turning point isn't a single betrayal or bullet. It's a lot slower than that. It's Micah's whispering in his ear. It's Hosea's growing tired. It's Arthur's silence deepening. It's the realization that for the first time in his life, Dutch's words simply are no longer enough. So what does he do? He talks louder, he rides harder, and he stops listening. Hosea warns him, gently, then urgently. Arthur pleads. Charles withdraws. Abigail begs him to see what's happening. But Dutch has already decided. They're the ones who changed, not him. Micah, of course, feeds this narrative, tells Dutch he's right, that loyalty means obedience, that all the doubters are just weak. And Dutch, drowning in a world that's moving too fast, grabs onto that voice like a lifeline. Because that's what Dutch fears the most. Not death, not even failure, but irrelevance. And so he doubles down on the plans, on the speeches, on the dream. Even as the bodies stack up, even as the family breaks apart, even as the cracks become canyons, and the people he once called children began to look at him with doubt. Dutch's descent isn't theatrical, it's just pitiful. A man who used to be followed because he inspired people, now demanding loyalty at gunpoint. A leader who once painted the world with words, now hiding behind them. And somewhere deep down, Dutch knows. He knows the dream is over, the disbelief, the offense at the idea that someone could challenge him, that someone could say what the rest of the gang is too afraid to. You are not who you used to be. But Dutch can't hear it, because to admit the dream is dead, he'd have to admit that he killed it. So he doubles down, again and again. He isolates himself, leans harder into Micah, cuts ties with Charles and Sadie, with everyone who still has a soul left to protect, even Arthur. Especially Arthur, because Arthur is the mirror. Arthur is the one who sees Dutch clearly, who knows the difference between faith and delusion. And that's why Dutch pushes him away. Not because Arthur betrayed him, but because Arthur remembers who he was. And Dutch can't bear to be reminded. That's the true tragedy. Not that Dutch failed, but that the dream, the beautiful, impossible dream, survived longer than the man who preached it. Even as he slips into madness, even as his hands are stained with blood of people who trusted him, even as the words, "I have a plan," turn from gospel to punchline, there's still part of you that remembers. That once, for a moment, Dutch meant it. Dutch walks away. After everything, after Arthur dies, after Micah is unmasked, after the gang he called family has burned to the ground, Dutch doesn't fall with a scream. He just walks into the snow. No last stand, no speech, no justice. Because that's who Dutch was at the end. A man so hollowed by his own voice that there was nothing left to fight for once. It finally went quiet. Years later, when John finds Micah holed up in the mountains, Dutch reappears, pale, weathered, and empty. He doesn't say much. He barely even looks at John. And when it comes time to act, time to choose a side, he does something that isn't brave or noble. He shoots Micah, then walks away again. No explanation, no redemption, just the soft, devastating weight of a man who can't even recognize the wreckage behind him. And that is the answer. What happened to Dutch? He stopped believing in the dream. He started believing in himself. Not the self he was, not the man his gang loved, but the myth, the voice. The idea that he was always right, because he had to be. Because if he wasn't, then all the death, all the sacrifice, all the blood spilled for the plan meant nothing. Dutch didn't become evil. He became empty. He mistook loyalty for silence. He mistook stubbornness for vision. He mistook fear for betrayal. And by the time he realized it, everyone who ever cared about him was either dead or done waiting. Dutch Vanderlyn didn't die a villain. He lived long enough to become one. Not because he wanted power, but because he couldn't face a world where he was just a man and not the dream he sold to everyone else. And in the end, that dream devoured him.